I forgot about like bios. Oops.
Oh, you all heard that.
Well, hello everyone, and welcome to. Oh, I'm losing my headset here. Hold on. Welcome to CoachX Live with the Institute of Coaching. My name is Jeffery Hall. I am the executive director of the Institute of Coaching, and I am here. It's a very special CoachX Live for me today, because I get to interview someone that I know personally, that is part of our leadership team, a dear friend, Dr. Pam Larde. So welcome, Pam.
Thank you. Thank you, Jeff. It's so good to see you.
So fun to
Again.
get to interview you, right?
Yes.
So I want to just take a minute and welcome everyone that's coming in from around the world. So say hello in the chat. I can already see that some folks are saying hi, and we love to see where folks are coming from, because it's always such an international audience of coaches. And we'll also sort of be glancing, both Pam and I will glance here and there to try to grab any questions that you might have during our time together. But I'm super excited to have my colleague as my special guest today. And the reason for that is because she has just published a really awesome book. I was just telling her literally right before this call that I was on a kind of coaching/mentoring phone call with a dear friend of mine, going through a difficult time, which many of us know how that can feel. And I said, you've got to read this book called Joyfully Single, A Revolutionary Guide to Enlightenment, Wholeness, and Change. And boy, does the world need a lot of enlightenment, wholeness, and change right at this time.
Yeah.
Yeah, so this is a well-researched, beautifully written book. And Pam, if you're not familiar with her, those of you that are part of our Institute of Coaching tribe have seen Pam on webinars and LinkedIn Lives, but she's an incredible Renaissance woman. She's a faceted scholar. She's a certified coach. She's an award-winning author. She's an associate professor of leadership at Anderson University. And she's the founder, she's an entrepreneur. She's the founder of the Academy of Creative Coaching. And, you know, the pièce de résistance is she's the director of education with us at the Institute of Coaching. And as I said, a dear friend to me personally. She took over the role that I had for many years and has more than filled the shoes, really. I mean, she's really just brought her gifts, her wisdom, and her incredible presence to us at the Institute. And we're so grateful to have her. So I'm excited, Pam, to dig in to this amazing book that you have just published. And I know you're tired because you've been on your book tour.
Oh my gosh.
I'll be gentle, but
thank you.
But let's start from just where this book emerged from you, because it's personal. There's a little bit of a memoir kind of tonality to the book, but then also some solid research, some tips. So I'd love to just hear from you, you know, a little bit of how that book came to be in existence.
Yes, you know, it's interesting. And thank you for the amazing introduction, by the way, much better than any bio would have read. So I appreciate it. So I have a really good friend, and she is now a coach. She wasn't a coach at the time, but one of the things that you'll find in the book is that our community is so important to us. And so when I was going through a divorce 14 years ago, she reached out to me. Or we were connecting, and she challenged me with, I think, probably one of the most powerful coaching questions I've ever been approached with. I was attempting dating. Dating was not pretty. And she asked me the question. She said, what if your life situation in terms of your relationship status never changes? What if you remain single for the rest of your life? What if you never marry again? And I have to say, I was offended. You know, how dare you speak such words?
That's not going to happen, right?
Speak such words over me. So I didn't say that, but I was stumped with the question because it never occurred to me that that could ever be a possibility. So but the question stuck with me. So as I went through the years, because I had this amazing plan, I was going to do all the health and wellness stuff. I know health and wellness. I know how to transition when you have a hard time in life. So I used all the tools that I've taught, that I've learned, and the great books I've read. And 3-4 years go by, no marriage. 4 or 5 years goes by, no marriage. So I got to a point where I was angry and frustrated. And I remembered that question that my friend asked me. And I said, what am I going to do right now with the life I have in this moment to love it and to enjoy it? I don't know what the future is going to bring. And I learned the hard way that I can't necessarily make things happen with my own two hands in every situation. When we are in business, especially when we fought to get to where we are in our careers, we think we can apply that to any aspect of our lives. It doesn't really work that way. So, so I took that question and I turned it into a new way of seeing life and a new life mission, and sat on the couch one day and started just to kind of process what that means, and asked my daughter, what do you think of this first paragraph of what might be a book? And she loved it. So that's where it started.
Oh, great. Yeah. And the timing, I was reading the book and realizing that, so much of what we're going through in the world today is so challenging. I mean, we won't go there today with any specifics, but we all know how much pain there is, and disruption, suffering. And I think on one level, we try to turn to our friends and we try to turn to our partners to find solace. But one of the key themes that I loved about your book is that you really have to start with yourself.
Right.
And it's and you really pull apart. I mean, you could have called the book The Myths of Marriage or The Myths of Partnerhood or whatever, right?
Right.
You really pull apart the fact that our Western tradition, culture, narrative has so much built-in pressure on happiness is associated with finding this so-called, Cinderella partnership story, whatever.
Yes.
And I just love the fact that where you come down and from your own personal journey, but also the research that you share, that's not where happiness emerges.
Right.
And you even take it a step further towards, it's not just about happiness, it's also about creating this experience that you call joy, that you self-create and then co-create. And I want you to talk a little more about that, because joy is really part of the theme that emerged, right, for you personally.
Absolutely.
And now, you have a podcast and you have a lot of, you're putting out there about, and those of us that are psychologists can sometimes poo-poo this idea of joy. Like, is she serious? Is that research-based, right? So talk to me about that, because it's special, it's unique, but it's also really powerful. So why joy?
Well, it's such a great question. So I spent the first 12 years of my, academic career and the scholarship on barriers and how people overcome barriers. I had 4 key populations that I looked at, one of which was first generation college students of color who first in their families to go to college. And what barriers, all the research talked about how it was difficult for them to get there, or the challenges they faced, or the ways in which they didn't succeed. And I needed my research to look at the ones who did make it and how was that possible for them? I then, just because I was requested to use my data from my initial dissertation research to work with veterans for a state federal organization. My work then became, how do veterans and their families, particularly service members, active service members, after they've returned from combat, how do they reintegrate? How do they, get back into life? And it really isn't even about getting back into life. It's about creating a new life, because, it's just never the same. So working with families and their service members, and really emerging from that was a concept called post-traumatic growth. How do people grow after trauma? Then looking at populations of people who experienced heartbreak. I did some research around that, looking at particularly divorce, how people coped with it, what their strategies were. And then finally, because I've received a little pushback on my original studies on first generation students and how they made it to college, my population of students were students who in I guess according to some feedback, and I agree with it, they were somewhat privileged. They had access in some ways, even though they were all first, actually, for the Latina population, they were all first generation Americans, but there was still some level of privilege that some of my, feedback folks, critics gave, they said, but my population of students that I work with, they walk through a trauma-filled neighborhood every day. They're raising their siblings. They are working 5 jobs. And whereas the first generation Americans, their parents found a way to create a level of stability for them that other students didn't have. So I then had to dive into trauma. What does it mean for students who are first in their families to go to college, who've experienced trauma before and during the journey? And that really gave it a whole new perspective. What I had been asked many times is, how does your research with these 4 very different populations come together? What's the commonality? And the commonality, after it took me maybe a year and a half to really sort of look at that. What do they all have in common? And it was loud and clear to me. It was the pursuit of joy. And the timing was incredible because I landed on and started really digging into and started writing about the pursuit of joy December 2019, 2 months, 3 months before we all shut down. So it gave me another lens from which to look at joy in terms of how people were dealing with this shutdown, how people were dealing with mass death all over the world and uncertainty. So it really grew and confirmed the concept of joy for me. And so that's how I stepped into it. So my joy concept goes well beyond being joyfully single. The framework in this book, I am applying it to different contexts, such as leadership, and our own personal lives in other areas. And so it really is much bigger than just singleness.
Yeah, I definitely picked up on that in reading the book. I mean, the part that makes it personal is that you were single and you were reflecting on your own personal experience. But the basic premise, the grounding of the research that you write about is much broader. And it really applies to all of us that have been through trauma, which is pretty much everyone, right? These days.
Yeah. I mean, I've even had married couples say to me, and there's been, some positive and negative feedback. Some married couples are threatened by this. Like, how dare you, let's not celebrate singleness. But I have had some married couples who've said, this has helped us look at how we individually, become our full selves, so that we can come together, so that in our togetherness, we are full together. And so I just thought, I did not expect that kind of feedback, but I've received that feedback quite a bit. And I find it really profound. I would have written that intentionally if I had.
Yeah, it's funny you say that, because I was thinking when I was reading the book, because I am in a committed relationship, and I was reading the book and thinking, there's a lot of the core premises of this that fit some of the experiences I have in a relationship, in a marriage. Like, I often feel lonely, single, disconnected, and disappointed in my partner, because they're not doing everything they're supposed to do. They're not making me feel, and then they're not filling my life with joy. Therefore, it's their problem, right?
It's their fault.
Yeah, exactly. And then there's another little voice that says, well, it might be better to be single, So
and I think those are the married people who get upset about the book, because they're like, don't stimulate that thought any further.
But what you're writing about is much richer. I mean, it is true that because of your own personal narrative, you made it that kind of focus, which is good. But I think that you're also pointing, and this is helpful for us as coaches, you're pointing to a much broader context for us to do
Right.
work with our clients, right?
Exactly.
And I'd love for you to talk about this a little bit, because some of the parts of what joy means to you, I can see a couple questions coming up, like what is the difference between joy and happiness? And you're really very specific about this in the book. So talk to the audience, talk to me about what does joy mean to you and how has it
Yes.
evolved?
So for me, joy is and not just for me personally, but I looked at different disciplines and how they describe joy, from theology to even neuroscience looks at joy. Um, and one of the things that seems to be the commonality is that joy is not it's not dependent on what's happening. It is not dependent on the stimuli of the environment. It is something that people can draw into because it is something that they've already created within themselves, as a force and as a way to pull through really difficult circumstances. So we'll see people in some really dire situations, even if we look at the civil rights movement, for example, women's suffrage movement. There are always Black Lives Matter, if we want to be even more current,
Right.
ways in which we've tapped into joy. The hashtag Black Joy, the hashtag Black Men Frolicking, which you have to check it out. It's amazing.
I
Um,
will.
these were all responses to difficult times, and how it is really a refusal. It is a resistance to succumbing to the any forms of oppression that might be sent our way. So joy is something that exists in spite of whatever is going on. Happiness is a response to the external stimuli that's happening. It can be stimuli, it could be what we've created. We can create moments of happiness for sure. But it's usually a direct response. It's like you tap the knee, your leg goes up. And so it is a knee-jerk response. It has its benefits. It is a part of our wellness journey. So there is value in happiness. Where joy becomes important is when there is nothing around us to be happy about. And we are having to pull from the wellness within us in order to be able to live out joy.
Yeah, I think you beautifully articulate that there is a way in which, if you're present to the possibility that joy is self-generative, then it can emerge in pretty much any situation. And then
Mhm.
that becomes one of the core tenets, I think, that you write about in terms of post-traumatic growth, right? When you're emerging from a really painful time, to think that you could actually get to a place where you're feeling somatic, mental, emotional, and somatic sense of joyfulness,
Mhm.
aliveness, vibrancy, or whatever way we want to describe it. Say more about how, like, if you're a coach and you're working with, and I know you have done this, but when you're working with someone who is having a challenging time, and they say to you, "Oh, I don't know if I want to read this book about joy. It's not
Oh,
really my thing," right?
yes.
Yeah, because it's a reality. It's like,
Yeah.
let's put the joy aside and let's feel sorry for ourselves, or whatever, the victim, whatever. And you do write a lot about all of that. But
Yeah.
talk a little bit about some of the tips that you have used in your own life and with your clients to
Well,
reclaim that joy.
I mean, I think first and foremost, it's important for us to acknowledge this hurts. Any anybody who read one of my recent posts, I just did a post on, ouch, this hurts today. Life is rough today.
I
Um,
read
you
it. I was like, oh, she's not going to be joyful.
but that's what helps me maintain the joyfulness, because I can say it out loud, and then I can be active about solutions. You can't resolve issues you don't admit exist.
Wow. Yeah,
you know,
that's true.
and look, you don't have to admit it on social media. It just happens to be my platform, and I know that it's helpful for people. So sometimes being transparent and sharing it with people is helpful for them. Um, And when I'm not up for it, I don't do it, so there's a part of me that's like, no, I definitely want to share this experience with other people so we can learn together. But I think what's so important is that we first are willing to acknowledge it. We are willing to have those moments where we're sliding down the shower wall, and in despair. Feel it. Let that happen so that you know exactly what to resolve. So you know exactly what emotions and feelings that are occurring within you, to play out and to address. Susan David, our colleague, talks about how emotions are signals.
Right.
And if we stifle them and just try to paint on some joy on top of it, that's, first of all, I would argue that that's not joy. But second, you're operating in a state of, it's false. It's that idea of false positivity. And I talk about false positivity versus toxic positivity. And that idea of false positivity is when you're walking around like, I'm good, I'm good, I'm good. And look, in some settings, you don't need to tell everybody about what's going on with you. But you need to have an outlet where you can do that. And the toxic positivity is when we put it on other people. And, you ask me, Jeff, how are you doing, this morning? I was like, you know what? It's rough. I'm struggling. And you say, you'll be fine. So, so it is what you are projecting onto me, because maybe it's something you don't want to talk about or you're uncomfortable. So
Right.
one of the first things
By the way, I couldn't do that. That's not a real example, right?
No, it is not, because the first thing Jeff said to me today before this is, I saw your post. Are you okay?
Yeah.
So, yeah. And if I had told him I'm not okay and I can't proceed today, he would have said, no, then let's not do this. This is, you need to take your time. That's what he would have said. So, and those are the kinds of communities that we need to either create if we don't have them, or draw near to. And that's the other tip or strategy. First being, let's be honest about what we're really feeling. And second being, making sure that we have communities of people that can honor what we're feeling and that can help usher in the joy with us, as it's needed. So those are two really important strategies.
Absolutely. I'm curious, so there's a woman in the chat, her name is Amina, and she didn't put a question, but I'm gathering there may be a question here. And so I'm curious because she put joy as a coping mechanism. And I know, having read your book, that I don't actually think you would say that it is. What do you think?
I would say that that's not all that it is.
Okay.
Yeah. I mean, and I'd love to hear your thoughts on that too. But I would say that, for example, today, one of the things that I'm going to do after this webinar and after, I have one other meeting, I'm going to go for a walk. I'm going to go out into the world, into nature, and take in the things outside that bring me joy, because I know that I'm depleted. And because I know that there's some things that I need to do to sort of regenerate myself. So from that standpoint, I do see it as a coping mechanism, but it is certainly much more than that.
Yeah, that's what I was kind of thinking, is that maybe it's step one is a coping mechanism. But true joy, the way you write about it in the book, is a broader, deeper, experiential sort of, I don't know, you write about it so eloquently, but it's a way of being.
Revolutionary. I mean, it's something that really can change the trajectory of your life if it becomes your way of life. Even when it doesn't mean you have to be joyful all the time. People who are around me know I'm not joyful all the time.
I'm sure your daughter is alive and the first one to
testify. Yes. Especially when she knocks on my door at 6 a.m. and says she misses the bus or missed the bus. So yeah, not joyful all the time, but it is a value in my life that I tap into, and it's sort of my north. And I understand when I'm falling below, and there's a part in the book where I talk about when you're sort of below zero, when you're below that threshold, You feel it and you know it because it is a value that you hold. And I know right now my goal is, okay, how do I get at least to 0 and then start building from there?
I love what you said when you said a value that you hold. I think that is a powerful, because yes, it may be a coping moment to reclaim joy, but the step deeper that I think as coaches we want to keep in mind is that it's a value driven way of being, like to really honor that is possible for me to really feel and experience joy. I know too many people who almost would push it away, like,
Yeah.
and
Oh,
in fact that connects to Maura, who is a friend of mine who's on with us today, and she asks, do you have to go through grief to know joy?
mhm.
What do you think? What do you think about that? Does it come only when you're grieving that you can find joy at the other side, or is there
That's
other
such a
ways?
good question. I mean, and the first part of her statement was that we're suspicious of it, and
Oh, right. Yeah.
I would agree. I mean, because joy is something that it actually takes a lot of nerve and guts to take in, because you're never going to just stay joyful forever. So some people like to just stay in the middle because the crash isn't as hard. Um, but yes, there has been work and research that I just was mind blowing for me. I actually posted about it once right after I read the paper, and it said that we acknowledge joy in a different way. We know joy because we know pain. We
Mm,
know that we are a polarized being. And so by understanding some of the most challenging things that we go through, it enables us to appreciate joy even more. The way that we're wired is this concept of habituation. When
right.
things are just kind of going and flowing through life, and we don't necessarily recognize or notice those things until something goes left. And then we remember, oh gosh, this doesn't feel good. And so I hate to say that sometimes it doesn't necessarily take extreme moments, but it does. The contrast does remind us the beauty of joy. And
Right.
sometimes instead of allowing it to come to us passively, one of the things that I try to help us remember in our book is to be proactive about creating joy so that it doesn't only happen in our lives after a fall.
Right. And you give a lot of wonderful practices in the book of finding, putting together literally a list of the things that bring you joy and then asking yourself, so are those actually happening in my life? Like, you really literally have to schedule joy. And I think that makes sense, right? Because to Maura's point, our culture is suspicious of it. So we're all suspicious of it.
Right.
And, but to the other part of her question, it reminded me of that famous story of the Buddha, where there's an unhappy woman in the community and she goes to Buddha to say, I want to be happy. Can you make me happy? And he says, yeah, I can make you happy. Just go around to talk to every single person in the community and have them tell you, find someone in the community that's never had any kind of experience of grief.
Mm.
And of course, she can't.
Yeah.
So, she comes back to Buddha and Buddha's like, well, that's because your source of joy comes from the grief if you haven't actually owned it.
Mm.
And I think that's kind of what you're writing about, right? It's like life is, well, the Buddhists say life is suffering. So it's part of normal for
My
us.
goodness. I want to go back and edit the book and add that story. That
Well,
is,
you've got so many wonderful stories in there. You don't need to add, you know, but it gets to that core. I mean, it's a core theme that is in the book when you're writing about post-traumatic growth. And
yeah.
yeah. So
Yeah.
we're going to run out of time. I could always speak to you for an hour,
I
but
see.
let's just sum up with some thoughts from you about what your biggest wish is about this book. What would you love for people to get out of it? And
Mhm. So, and I think the question that just came up by Sule really captures it. She, asks a very legitimate, very tough question. How is it possible to feel joy when there's no source or resource whatsoever of joy externally?
yes,
I.e., if you were in a war. Um, that's it's you can't draw it externally. There are times where we will not be able to draw joy externally. I can't tell somebody in the middle of a war to go for a walk and feel better. It really is something that comes deep from within. It's individual. The things that we value are the things that we have to tap into. The things that we hope for, which is one of the things that I talk about in the book, even if it means the hopes that we have for the future brings us joy. Even if it means that tapping into memories that we've had brings us joy. It is almost as an by any means necessary concept. I'm going to do what it takes to create this joy in me so that I can get through this next 10 minutes. That's what I want people to get from the book. I wrote this book understanding that people are going to be in much more dire situations than being single. So my hope is that the universal concepts in this book enables people to have, at the very least, some survival skills to get through the next minute.
And you absolutely offer that, and a lot of really great research, and it's very personal. So congratulations. I think it's a really powerful addition to a world that needs to have more joy, right?
Yes.
Yeah. So thank you for that topic. Thank you for your incredible work. Thank you for being my friend and our colleague at the Institute of
Thank you. And I will add, somebody asked where to get it. And I was trying to add the link there, but it's Barnes & Noble is the best place to get it. Amazon's throwing a little bit of a tantrum for whatever reason. It's there, but they cost more on Amazon, and I don't know why. So go to Barnes & Noble.
We're all Amazonians at these days, so it's like, try something else, guys.
Yeah.
Do you have a copy? Hold up a copy.
I do.
I have it only on digital. Beautiful
and the
book.
hardcover is full color, which that's not a color page, of course, but yeah, you can't see it. But yeah. So
thank you all. And thank you, Pam. And let's all find the joy in our day and in our lives.
Sometimes even if you have to fight for it.
Or in the moment. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Thank you.
Thank you all.
All right.
All the best to everyone. Take